Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping our continent. On our first story today, Nigeria's after public uproar, the Senate amends the Electoral Act to allow but not mandate electronic transmission of results, shorten the election timelines, and increase penalty for vote buying. Does this revision protect electoral transparency or weaken it through compromise? Next, the country plans to sell select state-owned assets from 2026 to reduce its 25 trillion budget deficit to attract private capital and support broader economic reforms under President Tinubu's administration. Will this asset sale strategy deliver long-term economic stability for Nigeria or merely provide short-term fiscal relief? Lastly, we will talk about Nigeria and South Africa as they deepen economic ties with China through refining partnerships, energy corporations, and new trade agreements aimed at boosting investment, industrial recovery, and market access. Will closer ties with China drive sustainable growth in Africa or increase long-term economic dependence? Joining us for insights today is Samuel Atiku, a policy analyst. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on the podcast.
So let's start with our first story, the electoral reform. So Nigeria is currently going through an electoral reform at the National Assembly. It's been going on for quite a while, and we had the conversation of the House of Representatives passing their portion of the amended bill, and the Senate passed theirs. But there were disparities between that passed by the House of Reps and the Senate. The Senate refused the electronic transmission, and this caused an uproar. We saw Nigerians come out in their numbers protesting at the National Assembly, fighting for electoral reform, fighting for a change in with the elections ahead in 2027, we saw that fight for integrity, electoral integrity, and a pushback. It was really interesting. And that, we saw the Senate take a turn, right? And they conveyed an emergency sitting, and they are allowed for somewhat transmission with certain, clauses. What are your thoughts on what happened? Did they change of allowing for electronic transmission? And they didn't mandate it. There's also the conversation about network penetration, certain polling units not being able to, have access to the internet. It will be, it will not be possible, as some senators stated, it won't be possible to transmit in real time. And I think in real time was kind of like what Nigerians were going for. We want it in real time, so it improves the transparency of the electoral process and build public trust, which of course is, lacking. So would like to hear your thoughts on this, especially.
I think it's one of those things that you have to critically look at. You create laws and you amend laws to make it one easy for people to vote, and then on the other hand of things, also ensure that you're enshrining transparency into what you're doing. I mean, the ultimate objective, overarching objective of what you're doing is actually ensuring that the electoral process is actually seen as credible. If we are to look closely at what has happened in the last election, I mean, I would say since 1999, and you look closely at the numbers, which is interesting, you will see that the total number of people registered seems to go wibble up, seems to have been going up, but the volume of people voting, actually casting ballots, had been on the downward trajectory. Yes, in 2019, I think we have about 57 million, 57, 58 million people that were registered. We had roughly about 30 million people that voted. If you look at the last electoral cycle, that's the 2023 elections, we have just 24 million people that voted, despite the fact that we have about 93 million registered voters. Um, so participation in election in Nigeria has been on the downward trajectory. If we are to look closely and then just looking at the number of registered voters as our basis, we've come down from almost 52% in 2019. I mean, 1999, in 2003, we had roughly about 69%. We seem to be on the downward trajectory. Now, I mean, the last election cycle, we had 26.7%. Over the course of that period, a lot of amendments have happened. And those amendments, the problem I've had is that most of those amendments did not put people at the heart of the amendment. I mean, so let's look at what the problem looks like. If you look at the Nigerian electoral cycle and you try to actually build it into a workflow, you start with the pre-election process itself, where people will typically register, whether you're registering a party, people register and all those kind of things. And then it terminates when elections are actually declared, and then extension of that is the entire tribunal that goes into the. So, I mean, just to make this extremely very clear, if we decide to break this thing down and we begin to look closely at the problem we have along that workflow, along that value chain itself, what you're seeing from every stage. I could do a quick round now. For instance, if you look at voters registration in Nigeria, yes, we've adopted the CVR. What do you call it now? You call it the CVR, right? The Continuous Voters Registration Process, which is enshrined in the Constitution and the Electoral Act, meaning that we should not stop. We should just continue registering people. We all know that every year a lot of people become 18. Of course, you see people celebrating their 18th birthday. By the day you're submitting, I mean, you're celebrating your 18th birthday, something should actually be eating your phone also. You are actually eligible to vote. The question is that how many of these people have been captured into the voters register? Very few people have been captured. Now, the process of capturing voters also, you need to actually do this biometric capture, meaning that you have to capture people's fingerprint, you take up their iris lead, you look at their eye, you take up their their facial features, you capture their address, which is critical in determining where they will vote. Now, for young people, especially people that are below the age of 30, most of them, at the point of registering, when they are 18, they are most likely in school or maybe in their parents' house. By the time the election actually come to bear, especially for those that became 18 after the last election cycle, they most likely moved around. The question is that how easy it is for you to actually move your registration about. I think for the last election cycle, they made it a little bit easier. But that said, we remember that almost 7 million people could not complete registration last year. Just think about that. 7 million people. And people are blaming the 7 million people for not completing their registration. I disagree. If you are a student of, if you understand the whole concept of a user experience, you will know that 7 million people cannot be wrong. The system itself is what is wrong. And unfortunately, if you look at this electoral amendment, they've done nothing to address that problem. So at the point of registration, you have a lot of people, millions of people will automatically be different. I mean, they will be stopped from voting, so that I don't use this grammar. They'll be, because the system refuse and the laws refuse to be adapted to their needs. That's the first starting point. We go to the second one, which is the pre-election preparation. Typically, INEC will display registers of voters in each of the polling units. Most of the time, when this thing happens, your identity is on display. They typically just paint people's picture, put people's age there, they put everything there without even minding the GDPR laws, the laws governing data protection, We don't really care about all those things. We just dump everything on people's wall. Some people would have mastered that act of going there to steal people's identity. Now, the question is that have you seen any law designed to protect voters, especially for those that their information is being displayed? And even when it's displayed, I remember myself, the first occurrence where I did my registration, I had to walk almost 2 miles away. That's almost about 2 miles away from there before I could find my name on one board like that. I said, "This is where I will vote." Some people will register on this, I mean, on polling unit A, and then they will find they will find everything. They will find their name about 12 bus stops away. Sometimes you have to go through. So the pain involved in finding your polling unit is so ridiculous, and we've not had anything making it easier for people to find their registration point. That's another problem. If you look at this Electoral Amendment Act, it's done nothing to address that. I mean, because of want of time, if we go to pre-election preparation before the election day, we all know what happens. The observers, how you accredit observers, who is responsible for what. The truth is that we don't need a professor to sit down in one room and begin to press calculator to compute electoral results. That's archaic. That's like, in fact, the Romans did not do that. That's about 2,000 years ago. You don't need them. You need a group of people, accreditators, you need journalists and all those people to be involved and the point go. But if you look at the Electoral Act, for instance, in the US that we are copying, before you can declare election, three people, right? Three, depending on the state, they need to look at what you are doing, that your calculation is correct, and they all have to sign before that election is accredited. A professor can sit down today, punch calculator, maybe for some reason or the other, 2 plus 2 is now becoming 9. And nobody will do the verification. Once he declares it, the only thing you can do to upturn that election is to go to the tribunal, wasting people's time and putting problems and then making it difficult for people to even trust the process. Unfortunately, the Electoral Amendment Act, I mean, we saw that happen the last electoral cycle. The Electoral Act had done absolutely nothing to find legitimate people, people with integrity, people that you look closely at their records and then put them in charge of doing this accreditation. And the whole context of oh, they are bipartisan is nonsense. I mean, to use the word loosely, it doesn't make any sense. There's no such thing as I'm not partisan. Everybody's partisan. You have something in it for you already. The mere fact that you are nominated by somebody automatically makes you partisan. So we need to ensure that we have that even distribution of how people look at this. It's not just about appointing what do you call it, party agent, and then party agent will be speaking grammar. That you are just there as an observer. You are just looking like every other person. You are just talking. There's nothing. Your talk means nothing on paper. We need to have at least 3 people accrediting election before elections are declared, so that calculations and all those things are not wrong. Again, the Electoral Act fails to address that. Now, on the election day, one of the biggest challenge we have is this big volume of information being moved around. Personally, I believe that you don't have, I mean, the workflow on the election day itself is that you go and carry one paper will be moving around. Some people will go on the boat. Before they get there, people are already tired. By the time they get there, we don't even know where the polling unit is. And everything is just so messy. The entire logistics around the elections in Nigeria has been a problem. If you look at it from 1999 to date, if you go to the 70s, it's the same story. There's nothing that we've done to address that problem. One easy way to address it is maybe to adopt electronic voting machine or something like that, a biometric voting machine that had been adopted in Brazil. If you look at Brazil, formerly they had similar problem to us. The terrain is very difficult to navigate, but once they introduce their biometric machine system, right, such that you cannot vote except you place your fingerprint on the machine and you reach your hand, and then automatically it activates the system. That you move on. I know there are challenges around paper trail and all those things that people can talk about, but again, the logistics situation, the National Assembly itself, the Senate and the House of Assembly and the House of Representatives, they've not sat down to critically ask people where the challenges are and begin to amend the laws to make it easier and make it the integrity of those logistics situation to actually improve. I mean, because I'm contesting election, I know I'm strong in this area, this particular area. I'm strong. Electoral material gets there on time. But that other place that I'm weak, I make sure I frustrate the process of getting elected. It's so simple. It's ABC. That's how we rig election in Nigeria. Now, The day people are voting also, there are problems. So sometimes you go to some polling units, somebody will have to do accreditation. First, you put your fingerprint on the machine. Oh, you are there, you are not there. Everybody will be laughing. Bru, bru, bru. Okay, come back after 3 hours. Then you come back after 3 hours. Oh, I've been accredited. Oh, they've ticked my box. Wasting people's time. This process should be seamless. The question is that, have you seen any improvement? Have you seen any law that streamlined this process? No, absolutely not. For instance, if I can't find my PVC for one reason issue, I mean, remember the last 2023 election, people's PVC were dumped in the canal. The question is that if I can't find my PVC, but you've taken my biometric, I should be able to walk up to the machine, put my fingerprint on it, and automatically the beavers authenticate me as a voter. Unfortunately, that has not been the case. So the question is that have the law actually looked at these challenges that people faced in 2023 and tried to amend the process to make it easy for people to vote? Absolutely not. Then you go to the election declaration. That's where the big fraud happened. So if you have thugs and you can pay people to disrupt election, of course, you go to places where you know you are weak, and then you disrupt the election, and then you protect the place where you are strong. But if you don't even have that, if you do that, it doesn't guarantee you victory. So if you can talk to that professor that they will always put in charge at the coalition center, they can manipulate things for you. They can bring in Biro and start rewriting results at that point. So the question is that what are we doing to make sure that is not that becomes impossible? People have suggested let's transmit results directly from the polling units. Essentially, it simply means that if you have 250,000 polling units in Nigeria, declare result at those polling units and let the media, right, civil society actors, and then government, everybody together in a room, do the coalitions yourself. And the only way that can happen if you could transmit the election directly from those polling units. Now, if you can do that, it becomes very difficult for you to rig election. Of course, you can still rig it, just like I've said. I told you about the workflow. But if you can get the result from each polling unit to a central collation center, the way it's done everywhere else in the world, except maybe in Nigeria, then it becomes difficult for people to bring out and begin to bring out interesting calculators that the logic around those calculators is something that I struggle to understand. The calculators are calculators such that 2 plus 2 is not equals to 4. So we need to eliminate that. Unfortunately, if you look at the what has happened now, the National Assembly itself, the Senate itself, had made it very difficult for that system to be foolproof. And that's why people are protesting. But I don't talk and talk and talk and talk. I know I've been saying this a lot. I know after the election is declared, there's also issues. So if you
Mm.
look across the workflow, you will discover that we have problems. None of that problem have been, I mean, if you look at this circle, there's no interest in addressing each of those issues. And that's where we are. I think I rest so that I don't take so much time.
I mean, I do agree with you on you mentioned so many issues, data protection issues, logistics issue, and the PVC issue as well. I mean, the PVC issue, there's the proposition where people are championing for PVCs, for people to be able to download their PVCs in the case that they, misplace it as well. Hopefully, I mean, I want to be optimistic to say all is not lost. There's still a few steps to the law being passed. Presently now they are going to go into their committee where they're going to be able to, merge, and hopefully they listen to the Nigerian people, because this is what the people are demanding, that election results should be transmitted in real time. Let's move on to our second story, where we're seeing Nigeria planning to, sell off state-owned assets again. We have seen the sale of assets before. Has it worked for Nigeria? Do you think it will be a different case from other, asset sales that we've had previously in the country? What are your thoughts on this? Is this going to change, or is it going to be, do you think it's going to be, I mean,
Yeah,
business as usual? Sell to our friends.
yeah. I think I think we're back to this. I remember in 2016, I did write a very elaborate paper, and then subsequently we had a series and series of meetings around the term you call budget credibility or fiscal realism. that when budgets are prepared, when you are estimating your revenue itself, you have to make sure that the indices you are using to estimate your revenue are in line with reality. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, when you're estimating your expenditure itself, plans to spend, you must ensure that those spendings are within your means. You don't spend out of your means. Even if you want to spend out of your means itself, essentially you're borrowing money, you have to ensure that the money you're borrowing, uh, it's in line with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, and then it's responsible. That's just the key word there. My take here is that if you look over the years, I think into as of 2016, um, taking the data from I think sometimes around 2010, 2008, 2009, 2010, 11 up till date, and you look at the budget of Nigeria, something will come to something will be something will get to you and you'll be shocked. Most of the most go I mean, so just for clarity, so that I don't lump people together. If you look at the budget of Nigeria before 2014, what happened is that we always spend about 4 trillion naira. We have a lot of oil revenue. The biggest chunk of our revenue has always been oil, and then you have the non-oil revenue itself. So most times than none, we typically will not make the projections for our oil revenue. And then that also impacts on the non-oil revenue. So we have some shortfall, but those shortfalls are not that massive. And so as such, it's not telling on the treasury. But in 2016, right, we started this expansionary fiscal policy in an attempt to actually ride out of the recession that happened in 2020, that started in 2014. And then we went into this 6 trillion. We went from 4 trillion to 6 trillion. But we knew that the fundamentals underpinning that spending, you can't spend 6 trillion, plan to spend 6 trillion. What will happen? How do you increase revenue from about 3 trillion, about 2 point something trillion then, to about 5, 6 trillion if you are planning to spend 6 trillion? And then the government came up with series of initiative. One of them is that, oh, we are going to introduce TSA, a single treasury account. The problem we had then was that most government agencies that are not captured under the federal budget, one way or the other, they tend to they tend to steal some money. I mean, to use the word loosely. And so if we have just one single account, we can capture everything in one single account, and then with that we'll be able to manage the money. We do that. That never materialized. And then what happened subsequently after 2 years of trying and nothing worked? Government resorts to printing funds using the central bank ways and means to cushion up the effect of the budget. And then we went on this expansionary fiscal policy system that makes absolutely no sense. And today the result is there for everybody to see: inflation. Now, when the new government got into place in 2023, right? 2023, 2024, for their first budget, when you look at it closely, we felt that, yeah, this is the time maybe to rein in on some of this spending. But unfortunately, they went together in the same trajectory, expanding the budget even beyond reach. Just imagine 16 trillion, then you have 20 trillion, then you have 50 trillion. The question is that what happens to your revenue? If you plan to spend 50 trillion, that's fine. But the truth is that how much revenue do you have? You're barely doing 10 trillion. You're barely doing 10 trillion and you want to spend 50 trillion. Meaning that you plan to spend 5 times of your revenue. On what in particular? You are not spending it on things that will begin to improve your revenue profile. You are not spending it on things, right, that will bring in more funds, that will throw in more funds in, I mean, improve the investment environment. You're spending it on, now call it frivolous, recurrent item that have no bearing, that puts the more weight on the treasury. So we find ourselves now finally eating where we should, right? But luckily for us, right, people came up with another strategy to overcome the problem. Let's drop subsidy, right? If you remember, oh, let the poor pay for it. Don't worry, it's the people that have 20 cars that are taking the biggest chunk of the subsidy. The poor man on the street is really not benefiting from the subsidy. They came up with this arguments that the best way to actually improve the finances of government is actually to drop subsidy on PMS. and subsidy on electricity and all this subsidy. Let's become a go-to country that not, and then the reform started. They dropped subsidy. We did one then, that if you drop all this subsidy and you don't rein in on government spending on those frivolous items, we are going to eat the road. Finally, we are there. So now, what has happened is that after the subsidy had been removed, there's no more money anywhere. Of course, some states are enjoying now. What can we do? Let's sell assets. That's where we are now. I will say something. There are three gates, right, that determine the fiduciary credibility of government. The first one is demonstrability, evidence to prove. I always say this. Ensure that everything you are doing is verifiable, is attributable, is auditable, and it's actually you're putting people at the heart of it. You have to demonstrate that what you want to do, one way or the other, improve the lives of the have-not and the working poor. The question is selling the assets of government to spend on what? Buy more yachts or something, or what are you spending it on? Any there's any evidence that suggests that selling this asset, one way or the other, improve the lives of Nigeria, or is it going to even make it difficult for government to raise revenue? That's the first question to ask ourselves. The second thing is the governability component. That's the function and the control. Can the system be procured? Can it be controlled? Can it be audited? All those big questions around contractual terms, the transparency around the cost structure. We know that if you are trying to set some of these assets, most people that will buy some of these assets are your friends and cronies. And can we really trust the process to ensure that there's transparency around how this asset is sold? Are we sure? The question is, we are not. The trust is not there. You promised us something during subsidy removal. Few months after, we are back to the process of actually selling up all assets. So the question is, what happens then? What has happened now? That's a governability question. The last one is the durability question, the life cycle question. The maintenance itself. What happens? For instance, you sell NNPC, you sell all the airport, you sell all the posts, you sell all the roads to private entities. By the time you finish selling all these things, you sell all government buildings. Don't worry, we'll sell everything, we'll now be renting. The question is that if you sell all these asset bearing, income bearing assets, especially SUs, what happens to the future of your revenue? Remember, you're already massively in debt. If you look at the debt to GDP ratio of Nigeria now, it's now higher than most developed countries, and we don't have any infrastructure. So the big question now is that if you sell all these assets, where is the rigor room for us to grow? That's the third gate that I look at. My own take here is simple. I disagree completely. I think the net gain from subsidy, let's see how it benefits the working poor. Let's see how it improves the lives of people first. Demonstrate that first before you go into selling assets. I'll end my statement there.
I mean, I agree with you. Once you were speaking about, selling off our assets, one thing that, just came to me was when we say, do we cut our coat according to our size or do we cut it according to our material? Anyway, that would be for us to wait and see what will happen with this sale when the government does do it. On our final story, we would talk about Nigeria, South Africa, and kind of their ties to China. But I mean, just your thoughts on the economic agreements that Nigeria, South Africa is having. And I mean, we've been speaking about this for months. China as well, building their, kind of like their stay in Africa.
I mean, yes, if you look at it closely, China is already Africa's biggest trading partner. I think we touched base on that the last time. And it's two-way. Of course, it's a China-Africa trade. Um, if you look closely at it, we are talking about $282 billion in 2023. That's massive, yeah, according to the China custom figures itself. If you look at Reuters, it's there. Um, if you look at this new initiative in Africa, there's new money on the table, right? But it's not the old style blank check that we had before. I mean, if you look at the 2024 Forum of Africa and African Cooperation, China did pledge about, I think, about $50 billion over 3 years in terms of credit line and investment. Even if it stops short of the broad debt relief, we know that, yes. That's the second point I want to quickly point to. I'll come back to your question. The third thing for us to remember is that China has also announced, right, plans to remove tariffs on all export coming from the 53 African countries in response to the US trying to take leadership in that area. That creates a potential major market access for African countries. And then I will say NMPC itself is saying that they are in talk with some Chinese company about a partnership around the refinery, if I'm correct. That's also very important to keep at the back of your hands. Now, the South African angle here is now very simple. If you look at what is coming out of South Africa, the officials are saying that, oh, that the China-African Economic Partnership Agreement is expected to follow by what they call is it the early harvest deal, sometimes in March. That's about a few months' time. I'm working on that. I'm looking at some some variables around that also. And that will give us duty-free access to South African export to China. So, in other words, um, the opportunities are there. They are enormous for us. So the question is that we as Nigerians, South Africa, and then potentially Egypt are about the three biggest economy in Africa. So you don't want to go competing against yourself. Rather, you want to go collaboratively. You want to approach it collaboratively. And one way to look at it is that, how will I put this now? I'm trying to use this word loosely, is to I mean, you put it in your words, is to actually to deepen our ties together, ensuring that we are going about it together. That's about the way. That's Nigeria and South Africa. We are not competing against yourself, but rather collaboratively, meaning that you begin to integrate your industry into themselves. One way to do that is if you look at Nigeria, we have abundance of crude oil. Well, not abundant, is there. And then we have this massive refinery that Dangote had built. And then how will I call it? Then the other element, which has to do with the petrochemical industries that you have around that. So the question is that South Africa themselves, they do have a lot of industries building around those petrochemical industries that uses feedstock from those petrochemical industry. So how do we integrate together so that if South Africa is selling those products to China, they're actually taking our raw materials from Nigeria. The other way around also, if you look at most of the manufactured spare parts, for instance, that we bring in from the US, from the European countries, South Africa do have capacity to produce bits of that. For instance, car parts and all those things. And the question is that we don't have to go to the Europeans together. We can begin to draw those. We could begin to work collaboratively more with South Africa, getting those things from South Africa, and then in return also selling things to them. So my take here is simple. I will say that uh, to make it loosely, that it's an opportunity for us. The potentials are there. The strategy that we put around this kind of deal is what is critical here at this point. I'm not convinced, my own opinion, personal opinion, I'm not convinced that the government will be able to make this work because of incidents of the past. But I will say that we do have I would say we do have a very strong potential, especially around these duty-free assets itself that China is giving us. Um, we have we have a very powerful opportunity for us to begin to industrialize our economy, riding on the back of this. Um, with the help of South Africa, and then South Africa also benefiting from Nigeria to actually see that we both are beginning to replace some of the goods that are coming from China. I will end, I mean, before I go, I will end by saying this. China take a lot of soybeans, maize, and then those associated products from beef and all those associated products from the United States. We know that there's been trade friction between China and the United States. The question is that what is Nigeria doing? What is Africa doing to actually tap into that market? I know that Angola, for instance, is already trying to plug that road with a massive soybeans farm that they are putting up to actually plug some of those with the help of China. But the question is that without Nigeria solving its insecurity, it's difficult for you to tap those opportunities and begin to make your country more prosperous. The challenges also of security in South Africa also have a way of impeding the ability to do that. Then more importantly, South Africa do have ability to mechanize their farm, create tractors and all those things. How can we tap into those? How can we integrate our economy across Africa? Leveraging the African Continental Free Trade Agreement between us and then the free trade agreement now we enjoy, export free. I would say free trade agreement. I'll call it the free access to the Chinese market tariff free. Is something that we need to explore as Nigeria, South Africa. I think the opportunities are there. I think it's something for us to ponder and think about.
I mean, excellent submission. What are we doing to, tap into those markets? Thank you very much for being on the podcast. It's always a pleasure having you. I always enjoy our conversations on the podcast.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
To all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. If you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe, you like, you share, and you drop your comments in the comment section. We'd love to read them as well. For deeper insights into our work, you can visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for tuning in to the week ahead. Join us next Friday for more updates that are shaping the African continent.